Today on NewsWatch, new details about the San Bernardino shooters emerge. See what investigators have learned and why they might soon have another suspect in custody. Plus, a case challenging affirmative action heads to our nation's highest court. See what the ruling could mean for college admissions. And we're sitting down with actor Chris Hemsworth. Hear what he had to say about his new role in The Heart of the Sea. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Concerns continue to grow in the battle against ISIS, both at home and in the Middle East, as disturbing new information is coming out about the San Bernardino shooters and a possible new arrest. That comes as lawmakers push for stronger action against the terror network abroad. Caitlin Burke is on this story.
The FBI says the couple who launched the terror attack in San Bernardino, California, was radicalized long before they met online and before ISIS emerged as the global threat it's become.
Our investigation to date indicates that they were actually radicalized before they started courting or dating each other online.
This oversight raises new fears about potential problems with the government's visa program. Tashfeen Malik came to the U.S. on a fiancé visa in 2014, and the government didn't detect her radical views before letting her into the country. But the FBI says it doesn't believe ISIS has terror cells in the U.S.
So far as we can tell, they have not succeeded in penetrating our borders with their operatives. That's an aspiration of theirs.
As the FBI continues trying to unravel the information left behind by the killers, word of an earlier plot has surfaced. Farouk's friend Enrique Marquez, who's accused of purchasing the assault-style rifles used in the San Bernardino attack, claims he and Farouk planned an attack in 2012. Investigators are trying to piece that new information with what they already have, including a picture of a San Bernardino area high school that was found on Farouk's cell phone. Fox News reports that federal authorities are expected to bring charges against Marquez. While investigators look into terrorism at home, some senators have serious questions about how the war against ISIS is going in Iraq and Syria. Defense Secretary Ash Carter testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee Wednesday, saying the U.S. is ready to help push back ISIS in Iraq.
The United States is prepared to assist the Iraqi army with additional unique capabilities to help them finish the job, including attack helicopters and accompanying advisors, if circumstances dictate and if requested by Prime Minister Abadi.
Senator John McCain pressed Carter for more U.S. troops on the ground to fight ISIS, saying, quote, "There are 20 to 30,000 of them. They are not giants. Somebody is going to have to convince me that air power alone is going to do the job." As lawmakers debate what to do about ISIS in the Middle East, many analysts believe that San Bernardino was only the beginning of successful homegrown attacks here in the U.S. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Evangelist Franklin Graham is supporting Donald Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering the U.S., saying he proposed a similar measure first. Graham wrote on his Facebook page he said for some time that Muslim immigration into the United States should be stopped until we can properly vet them or until the war with Islam is over. Various politicians criticized Trump's comments, but Graham says, quote, "Politicians in Washington seem to be totally disconnected with reality, and that this affects our security and the future of our nation." Liberty University's president is proposing that students at school be allowed to bring concealed weapons into dormitories. The announcement Wednesday by President Jerry Falwell Jr. comes just days after he encouraged students to get permits to carry concealed guns in response to the mass shooting in San Bernardino, California. Falwell is making changes to the dorm policy at students' request.
That's because of a lot of requests I've received from students about not being a good idea of having gun-free zones in the residence halls. So we're making that change at your request.
The school's governing board must still approve that change. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel is dismissing calls for him to step down, even as protests over police brutality continue. But Emanuel is apologizing for the deadly shooting of a black teen by a white police officer. Officer Jason Van Dyke is accused of shooting 17-year-old Laquan McDonald 16 times, but it took a year for that video to be released. At a special meeting of the Chicago City Council Wednesday, the mayor said, "I take responsibility for what happened because it happened on my watch. And if we're going to fix it, I want you to understand it's my responsibility with you." The nation's highest court will again tackle the question of affirmative action, this time as it relates to universities. Paul Strand was there as the justices heard both sides of the argument.
Abigail Fisher believed her race may have hurt her chances to attend the University of Texas. She sued, and this is the second time her case has come before the Supreme Court.
Like most Americans, I don't believe that students should be treated differently based on their race.
Affirmative action was originally meant to help end racial unfairness in America, but now in the 21st century, some say it's just adding to it.
Joshua Thompson of the Pacific Legal Foundation opposes universities using racial preferences.
The costs of using racial preferences are undeniable. They stereotype, they stigmatize, and they're pernicious. The benefits here are very speculative. What are the benefits of diversity? Nobody can pinpoint it, and it's all very amorphous.
But UT attorney Gregory Garr argues a system without racial preferences clearly doesn't measure up.
And then you had reports of racial isolation and a hostile racial climate with respect to African Americans and Hispanics, which was a situation where the University of Texas clearly was not meeting its educational interests, compelling educational interests in educating the future leaders of Texas.
Activist Al Sharpton felt a majority of the justices sounded like they might rule against the affirmative action system.
Today could be a devastating blow to those that are continuing to fight for racial fairness on campus.
University administrators insist they haven't gone overboard, and the number of minority graduates isn't that large. Fisher's lead attorney Burt Ryan shot back.
Race is an odious classification, and it really doesn't matter if your results are small. That sort of indicates you didn't have to do it in the first place.
At its center is a core question the justices could decide to settle here. Should America's universities be allowed to use your race as a determining factor in your getting an education at their institutions? Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Supreme Court.
Some black pastors say the Black Lives Matter movement isn't going to solve the problems facing the inner cities, and neither is the government. A number of urban pastors gathered in Washington Wednesday to say the Black Lives Matter movement concentrates on police violence against blacks, but they argue it does nothing to solve the plagues of poverty, fatherlessness, crime, and immorality that ravage inner cities. They're pushing Project Awakening, a plan to unite churches, businesses, and private institutions to renew cultural values and rescue urban lives and communities.
Project Awakening is going to address this. It's directed to address this issue of removing the lie of the community pitted against law enforcement. It's not we against them.
Government has not helped the situation. It's only made the situation worse. So we're looking to partner with corporations and private foundations and bring in mentors and begin to get the entrepreneurial juices of people flowing. I've said many, many times, it should not be that the drug dealer is the primary entrepreneur in the black community.
The pastors say concentrating on racism will not solve the crisis of urban America. They argue instilling traditional values and a renewed respect for capitalism and work in young people will do much more to pull them up out of hopelessness and poverty. Gay activists in North Carolina are trying to force magistrates to perform same-sex weddings even when it violates their religious beliefs. 3 couples have filed a lawsuit to overturn North Carolina's law that allows religious freedom for those magistrates. But State Senate Leader Phil Berger says everyone seeking a marriage license in North Carolina has received one since the law was enacted in June. He said, quote, "This is just the latest attempt by the far left's political correctness mob to force their beliefs on everyone else by trampling the First Amendment guarantee of religious freedom." This week, lawmakers gathered to talk about Christian persecution in the Middle East. Congressman Chris Smith, who chairs the House Subcommittee on Global Human Rights, says the U.S. should label the enslavement, torture, and execution of Christians by the Islamic State groups as genocide. Smith also says charities that assist refugees have found Christians who flee ISIS also face religious violence in the UN's refugee camps as well. Coming up, the liberal former Fox News host who almost drank himself to death because of George W. Bush. Bob Beckel explains why he should be dead and how God kept him alive. Bob Beckel is a well-known former political consultant. He was a commentator on both Fox News and CNN. As he explains in his new book, If Not for the Grace of God, he should be dead. He spoke with Jennifer Wishon to explain why.
Bob, you weren't kidding. You really should be dead.
I really should be. Yeah, I've been shot and stabbed in a couple car wrecks where people died. Everybody died except for me, and God knows how many overdoses of drugs I've taken.
In his new book, I Should Be Dead, Bob Beckel explains how he survived politics, TV, and addiction. He took his last drink and drug on January 19, 2001, the night before George W. Bush's first inauguration. Beckel was mad it was Bush, not Gore, who was heading to the White House.
And I went down to a biker bar in southern Maryland, and I was at the bar trying to pick this woman out. It was very attractive. And I felt something behind me, and I turned around. Her husband was there with a .45 caliber right in my face, and he pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off. He hadn't chambered the bullet. Somebody grabbed him from behind, and it blew a 3-foot hole in the ceiling. So they threw me out in the parking lot, and just before I passed out, I remember saying, God, I really don't believe, but if you do exist, that's the last drink I'll ever have.
He woke up in the VIP room of a Washington psychiatric ward. To add insult to injury, he could hear Bush's inaugural parade while lying in his bed. The story of Beckel's self-destruction to that point is extraordinary. One of only 2 photos in his new book include his father, a brilliant man who was also a drunk.
I came from a dysfunctional family, very dysfunctional, and my father used to find great humor in throwing me down the stairs. And, you know, back then, you went to school and you were all beat up and nobody said anything.
Bob's passion for politics started as a young boy, first in 1960, watching his father support John F. Kennedy, and later with his dad's involvement in the civil rights movement. Ironically, it was the beatings from the hand of his dad that taught him to thrive in Washington.
As a survivor, you learn how to talk fast, cut deals, lie when you have to. Perfect training to be a politician, you know. So when I got out, I did very well in the business, and in Capitol Hill is full of survivors. The problem is if you don't turn and face your demons, it's going to catch up with you.
You arrived in Washington on your birthday, 1972, with very little money, absolutely no prospects. 5 years later, you're sitting in the Oval Office briefing President Carter. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's for a guy that grew up the way I grew up. But then, because I didn't have faith, I couldn't figure it out. I kept waiting every day for the Secret Service to come into my office and say, oh, you fraud, get out.
Throughout his storybook career advising congressional campaigns across the country, Beckel made millions that ended up financing vacation homes for his drug dealers.
I used to wake up and look out my window at the front of my car to be sure there's no blood on it, that I hadn't hit anybody.
He eventually lost his business, his marriage, and his once flush bank account. There at his lowest point, sitting on a rock in the middle of a field in Maryland, Beckel called out to God.
God, I don't know if you exist, and this is probably the worst thing for me to do, to ask you the first time out, if you could help me with some money, but I need money really badly. And this was out a mile back on a dirt road. Next day, I went out to the mailbox, and always junk mail. Nobody ever sent me anything. And I opened it up, and there was a letter addressed to me. And there was a check inside for $20,000 from a guy that owed me that for 15 years. So I hurried down to the bank. I said, is this any good? And he said, yeah, it's good. It's fine. We'll put it right in. Now, you know, people could say that was just coincidence, but I don't think God's in the business of necessarily doling out $20,000, but I think that, you know, he gives you free will, and including free will is the will to seek faith in him and through Jesus Christ. And if you do that, you will be rewarded for it. I believe that.
Conservative columnist and friend Cal Thomas helped lead Beckel to Christ, and reading the Bible made him rethink some of his positions.
When I came to faith, I was on pro-choice boards, you know, and I dropped off of those because you couldn't read the Bible and be pro-choice.
But he still considers himself a liberal Democrat.
I still believe that there are, you know, tonight someplace in this city, a child's going to be born to a crack addict mother and someplace tonight in this city in the rich suburbs, a white kid will be born to wealthy parents, and I just don't believe they have an equal shot at life. And unless and until I'm confident that everybody has an equal shot at the American dream, then I'm going to remain a liberal in the sense that I do believe that the government has a responsibility, along with charities and others, to help that child till they're 18 years old.
Now he works with addicts, leading interventions to get people into rehab.
It's important for me because it keeps it green. You know, it reminds me of what it was like.
It's become his ministry.
You know, there's no greater reward, I think, than taking somebody who's terminally ill. Most people get shy away from it, but holding their hands and walking them over to the Jordan and handing them off, you know, to a better place.
Digging up his past was hard, but Beckel says unburdening himself is liberating. Now more than ever, he's reveling in a life that's joyous, happy, and free.
There was a huge hole in my stomach, you know, that I kept filling with drugs and alcohol. And now I fill it with God, and it's a much better way to go, and he won't make you sick, you know.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
His book is called I Should Be Dead. You can find it online and in bookstores everywhere. Up next, the true story of Moby Dick. Will sit down with actor Chris Hemsworth and hear about the epic adventure film in the heart of the sea. Moby Dick is a classic American novel, but you may be surprised to learn Herman Melville's tale about a massive whale was actually inspired by a real-life story of survival. You may know him as Thor from the Avengers film franchise, but actor Chris Hemsworth now brings this amazing story back to life in the epic adventure film In the Heart of the Sea. It hits theaters tomorrow, so we sit down with Hemsworth for this week's Studio 5. But first, here's a sneak peek at the film.
What was that, Mr. Lawrence? Mr. Chase!
Fine, Mr. Lawrence.
This script to Ron? What was it about it that made you bring it to him?
I was just fascinated by the story, you know, and then the moment I found out it was based on true events, I was even more encapsulated by it, you know. But it was the opportunity to have this epic, visually stunning, you know, adrenaline-driven sort of experience and backdrop. But at the center of it, it's a tremendous amount of heart and soul, and it be, you know, about these relationships between these men and the horrific circumstances they went through and the questions they were forced to ask, you know, about themselves and life and their relationship to the environment and you know, man versus nature and survival and so on. You know, a lot of different themes, I guess, struck a chord with me.
Beautiful. What would you say the biggest difference is between Chris Hemsworth and Owen Chase?
The differences. Look, I mean, at the start of the film, you know, I'd like to think I'm not nearly as, you know, sort of ego-driven and you know, ruthlessly ambitious as he is. You know, I certainly have a fair amount of passion and ambition and so on, but his is sort of, you know, relentless. And yeah, and then the second half of the film, when he basically is a whole different person and sort of transcends whatever personality he had before. I love that sort of enlightened state he was in, and the sort of, you know, the much more introspective attitude he had on things.
Real quick, tell me about the weight loss journey. I mean, I think of my son seeing you as Thor and what we're used to seeing, and then how I saw you in the film. What was that journey for you?
Yeah, it's pretty tough. It was, you know, the 4 months where we started the film at, 3,000 calories and then dwindled down to about 500 or 600 by the end of the shoot. And that was one of the toughest things I've done, but I think absolutely essential for us to, in any way empathize with what these guys went through and give a truthful portrayal of their experience, And it made you, there was no acting required, we felt exhausted and beat to hell and starving and so on.
I can imagine. What would you say it is about them that allowed them to, the survivors anyway, to push through? I mean, because I'm watching this and it seems so easy to give up.
I think in any instance, as long as if you've got something to live for, and whatever that thing is, if that love or passion for it outweighs the fear or the exhaustion or the threat or whatever, then that's the first step, And I think, in my character's case, he wanted to see his family, he wanted to see his daughter, and I don't know if there's any stronger motivation to defy all odds than that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The film is directed by Ron Howard. We have an extensive interview with him. You can see a preview of that on tomorrow's 700 Club. Stay with us. We'll come right back. It is time now for your Thursday Thankful, and there are so many things to give thanks for always, but today I thank God for relationship. It is nice to know we can pray without ceasing, and He is faithful to hear every spoken and even unspoken word. With that, be sure to make this a thankful Thursday. And that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about, and you can find it at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that online as well. Thank you so much for watching. We look to see you right back here tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.